titling today's message. At first, I was going to title it Report Cards, but report cards is what you receive at the end of something, and since we're not at the end, we're going to change it to Progress Reports. So this morning's sermon is titled Progress Reports. We're going to go through a few verses pretty quick, and then we'll get into the meat of what God's got for us this morning. Psalm 111:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Proverbs 1:7, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Proverbs 16:16 says, "How much better is wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen over silver." Proverbs 19:20, "Listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days." With all that being said and how we started this morning, there's no doubt we're going to be speaking to wisdom, but also receiving instruction. We will study and speak on these topics, but I will start off by stating the biggest issue that we face in gaining wisdom. Does anyone want to know the number one biggest reason that we can't gain wisdom? We will look at Psalms 11:10 again. 111:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord. This is something that is over time, as the church has gotten more laxed and gotten far more driven by what is popular and what people want to hear, and we want to feel warm and cozy and so safe in our churches, the fear of the Lord has kind of dwindled. The meaning of that has lost a little bit of what it should be. And to someone who is not saved, it is much different than the fear of God to the person who is saved. For the person who is not saved, that's fear of God, right? Fear of being judged. Fear of eternal separation in hell. Fear of not being the God of their lives. There's a lot of fear in turning your life completely over to God, because now I'm not master. Now I'm not the one calling the shots. I'm not the one making the plans. I'm not the one plotting my course. God is, and that's a big fear for a lot of people. I know a lot of people who are really good people who want to live a good godly life even, but they don't want to give God control of it. The fear of God for people who are saved is much different. Ours is to be in reverence and awe of God. We're going to look at Hebrews 12:28 and 29. Hebrews 12:28 and 29. Just two verses, but very, very powerful. "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably." I'm going to say that again. Serve God acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. This reverence and awe is what our fear of God comes from. This serves as motivation for us to surrender all. So, consuming fire. We're going to make sure we understand what we're talking about when we say consuming fire, because again, that's where we should be motivated to fear God with reverence and awe. So, I'm going to give you two options. I'll repeat the options. You raise your hand for which one your vote goes to. Consuming fire. A cozy little campfire that you want to snuggle up to on a chilly night. That's option number one. Option number two. A consuming fire that destroys and burns everything in its path. So, if you were on the side of the cozy, warm campfire for a consuming fire, raise your hand. Now, what about a fire that ravishes and destroys everything in its path? Which one is the consuming fire? God's consuming fire will burn through everything worthless. It will burn through everything sinful. It will burn through all selfishness. It will burn through all the earthly junk. His fire destroys money, fame, accolades, popularity. It will all be devoured by the wrath of his consuming fire. Only what is good, only what is dedicated to God, and only what is righteous will be left. Everything else will burn away. That is the consuming fire that demands our reverence and awe. That is what motivates us to have the proper fear of the Lord. In what we read, proper. There's a proper way to do it. But how many people and how many churches fear God improperly or not at all? Some treat God like his consuming fire is that cozy campfire that we talked about. And if you live like that, you're going to get burned by the real fire. If we looked at the world and ourselves with God's eyes in reference to this, do you know how many burn victims we would see? Everywhere. Everywhere, because we are playing around like this God's consuming fire is just this little thing. So, it's time for progress reports. So, I'm going to ask some questions. Think to yourself. If you want to answer out loud, go for it. If you don't, like I said, keep it to yourself. But I'm gonna let you. I'm the coolest teacher ever. I'm gonna let you grade yourself. But you see what kind of grades you get. How are we doing when it comes to the fear of the Lord? Are we gaining wisdom? Are we listening to good, godly advice? Are we thinking about our words before we speak them? Are we spending time in God's Word? Are we praying before we make decisions? And obviously the list, we could do this all day. The list could go on and on and on. But are we doing what we are called to do, or are we just another burn victim? And I'll be the first to admit I've got scars. I've been the cause of having some of these burns myself, as I'm sure we all do. But my prayer is that with these burn scars that we've got to this point in our lives, that we are learning from them, that we're not repeating these things, and that we realize that God's consuming fire is nothing to play with. The fear of God is something that is very real and will penetrate all the way to the point of your heart if you will let it. We can't put anything around it. We've got to let it penetrate. We've got to let it have all, surrender all. Otherwise, we are playing with fire, and it's not to be played with. The world and much of the church is not living in the fear of God. The world is booming with more intellect than it ever has, ever. And I've heard Matt speak to this several times. I guarantee our world is smarter than it has ever been. The technological advances, the medical advances, the scientific advancements, all these things that have taken place, we have got more geniuses per capita than we have ever had. Yet we are dumber than a box of rocks. It is unbelievable. There's no wisdom in it. There's no wisdom in what we see taking place. There's very little common sense. Why is that? We're far more occupied with chasing being the smartest, being the best, being the first to do something, as we are called to be the least. You don't, who gets praised for being the wisest? No one. Probably most people probably don't even know you're wise because you're usually sitting back here humbly quiet. And in this world, that's not what gets you places. To be a servant of the Lord, you better have a self-deprecating personality. To receive wisdom, you better. But we don't have that. We have people that center stage, front of the stage, all over the world, all over the church. It is time for that to change, especially in the church. And if it doesn't change first in the church, it doesn't stand a chance to change in the world. It is time for God's people to take a stand. I've been talking about revival for the last few weeks, and there are several things starting to happen that fall in line with the reasons that we have been speaking to revival. The world has been infringing on God's people for far too long. And just like Roe v. Wade getting overturned and people getting upset about it, we better be ready. As God's people start to take back kingdom ground that has been infringed upon by the enemy, that we have allowed to happen, as we start to take that ground back, the world will resist. They will fight it, and we must be ready. And when I say that we must be ready, I don't mean that we need to be ready for a fight. I don't mean that we better be standing there ready to go with shotguns and ARs. What I mean is we better be ready because at some point in time, that resistance will start to fall. And these people will have to know love that they've never known, compassion. We've got to be ready to disciple, mentor, help, listen. We can't help anyone fix a problem if we're too busy being the guy out front. Listen, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. We got to be able to listen. We've got to exercise some wisdom over these situations. This Roe v. Wade thing getting overturned is huge. And after it happened, Clarence Thomas started talking about further things they've got on their mind. When was it that John Hagee was talking to President Trump? It was before he ever decided to run, right? And he had a vision, and he knew that Donald Trump was going to be president, and he knew that he was going to do something amazing. He knew that God was appointing that for something huge. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of all of it. Donald Trump has spouted off at the mouth. He said a bunch of weird stuff, blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. I don't care who your president is. If he serves God, that's cool. And guess what? He appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. How many votes did Roe v. Wade getting overturned win by? 3. 6-3, right? So it won by 3. I was looking at the difference. 6-3. Donald Trump, whether he knew it or not, did something for God, was appointed for God, and did what he was supposed to do, and it's going to save millions of lives. Millions. But you look at society, you look at the world, you look at those who are lost, and what are they doing in reaction? Listen, I don't care about the political side of it. What I care about is God's people doing what they're supposed to do, being ready for what we're supposed to do. And just like when Jesus came to this earth, and he didn't come as some supreme warrior, but rather he came here to lay his life down, we don't have to be ready for war. God's people don't have to be ready for that kind of war, but a spiritual war where we are willing to pick people up and not put them down, where we're willing to teach and not talk down, where we're willing to love and not hate. You think of the time of that it has been since Roe v. Wade. Many people living these days, that's the world that they know. But it doesn't stop with abortion. It's everything. Kids these days, teenagers these days, kids in their 20s, 30s. We have learned a whole lot more about hate than we have love. We have learned a whole lot more about Kanye West than Jesus Christ. We have studied more of the accolades of Kobe Bryant than we have spent time in our Bible. When all of this starts to change, the church of God better be right, and we better be ready. Because these people, just like a young child, have you ever been around a young child that just completely lacked discipline? And the first person that ever really gave it to them, they gravitated to that person. I've been the person that they gravitated to, and I've been like, what is wrong with this kid? I'm meaner to him than anybody, and he loves me. Weirdo. Those kids in that situation, they gravitate towards it because they need it. We need to be willing to gravitate towards what it is God is trying to teach us. Discipline, wisdom. So that when those people who know nothing else but what the world has offered come to us, we're ready. Because just like that little kid, they're going to desire it. They're going to want it. And it's not going to make sense. But we got to be ready for it. Look at Matthew chapter 7, 24 to 29. Matthew 7, 24 to 29. The first few verses of this are in red. I'll point that out so you can for sure turn up the volume. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man whose house is built on the rock. And the rain descending, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell. And great was its fall. And so it was, when Jesus had ended these sayings, that the people were astonished at his teaching. For he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Well, when Jesus spoke, he did it with some power. We are on the rock. And all of these earthly things that we have spoke to are heading for a fall. There are going to be many, many people whose lives are completely turned upside down. And it is because their lives are built on sand. Our lives better be on the rock. We better be living in proper fear of the Lord. We need to listen to good, godly wisdom, counsel. We need to be growing in godly wisdom. As we talk about progress reports, it's about time we get our grades up. There's a lot of us who might just be barely doing enough to stay eligible. I don't want to be a church and a people of D+, C- students. When you're in class, now for some of you this may be a little bit harder, but take yourself back to high school. You wanted to be sitting next to that smart kid, right? They's going to be able to help you out. I did. Now, if you were that smart kid, sorry, but I wanted to be next to that smart kid because I was like, if I can't learn it from the teacher, maybe they can help a dumb guy. When you think about preparing for a test or a quiz that you're getting ready for, are you going to go sit next to your buddy when study time comes who's carrying a D- average? Or are you going to try to cozy up to the kid who gets straight A's on everything? Which one of them are you going to cozy up to, study with? When the sand leads to failure, when the people whose lives have been built on sand, when the house finally comes crumbling down, we need to be the type of people that they can go to. We need to be the people who strive to be the valedictorian, who try our dangdest to do everything that God has blessed us to do. It's a blessing. Living a life for God, a lot of times it doesn't seem glamorous. A lot of times it seems frustrating. And I promise you, a lot of times, if you allow it to, it may very well be. But it is the most rewarding thing that you can do. To do these things, to store up these words in your heart and in your mind, and to let it be a lamp unto your feet. To do those things it's rewarding. It's a blessing to be able to help anybody that God calls you to help. I want to be a people who are willing and able to answer that call. Because as God's people continue to move forward, as we continue to take ground back for the kingdom, what's going to come right along with that? Revival. We're on the verge of something big in this country. And things are falling in place. Part of that is dependent on how the church acts, how we respond, if we are ready. The awesome news is, if it's God's will, it's going to happen anyway. But wouldn't we much rather be a part of it? I want to be the A+ student that people want to come sit next to, not the F student that's like, hey man, I need some help. We're going to set some chairs up here in a second. We're going to go into another time of prayer and worship. We've stated that one of the biggest reasons that we don't gain more godly wisdom, that we don't learn more, is an improper fear of the Lord. But somebody else said it a different reason, that's probably a close number second, a lack of submission, a lack of surrender. When I spoke to those who were not saved, and I said the fear of not being the God of our lives, that's a big fear for a lot of people, and it doesn't end with salvation, because there's plenty of church people, churchgoers, that are faithfully here every time the door swings, that still want to be in control of their lives. We've got to learn to fear God properly. We've got to realize that consuming fire is a real thing, and it will burn up everything that's not about Him. We've got to surrender. We've got to submit. We've got to walk faithfully and obediently. I truly believe we're the skin on our teeth away from revival. I'm ready for it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being a big part of it, as I hope we all are.